Welcome to Recombination Nation. Today I have an extraordinary guest. Glenn Roberts is the very dedicated and motivated founder of Anson Mills, a nexus that brought nutritious, resilient landrace staple crops back to his local farming community. But he has a much more diverse and interesting past behind that as well that I want to touch on as well. So that's my quick introduction, Glenn. Do you want to tell us a bit more about your very unusual life path that eventually led you to this kind of outsider agriculture, but has a really rich and maybe surprising kind of origin story behind it?
Well, first off, Shane, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I haven't done a ton of media in the last couple of years because I've been on the road pretty much nonstop with my best buddy ever, climate change, right? Um, I'm Glenn Roberts, by the way, and I do own and work with Anson Mills. There's other things that I work with as well. But to say how I got here, it's actually the short version is probably the best thing because I got here because of my mother and somewhat because my sister, because she was an older sister and she could really boss me around when I was a kid. So she was interested in geology and farming. And I just was interested in any old thing. I didn't really have a direction for a long time. So I did whatever she told me to, because if I didn't, it wasn't pleasant. Let's put it that way. So, and now we call her Saint Holly, and she's still my older sister, and she's a wonderful person. But she and my father, who had a hobby of, and since you're sort of in that kind of the world, his favorite hobby was when we'd have big windstorms where I grew up in the West Coast in Southern California, San Diego and La Jolla to be exact. There were wild stands of eucalyptus trees there, and they would blow over in big storms. They were huge. And my dad liked splitting logs. Don't ask me why. He wasn't a logger growing up. He was a vocalist and an artist and a musician. Professional. So it didn't make any sense. I've never known any vocalists that like to be lumberjacks, but these trace eucalyptus trees that blew down uh, would have the trunks be 6 foot diameter. And if anybody's ever tried to cut eucalyptus wood with a chainsaw, essentially it just burns up chains, right? And so it's some of the hardest wood to cut in the field. So that's what he liked to do. And I was a log splitter by the time I was 7. So th that was one influence. The other influence was on top of being a musician and a vocalist and working with some of the best people in the world, Andre Previn being one, and Leonard Bernstein, Julius Herford. He really had a lot of very cool friends. So I was very, very lucky growing up in that. And he was also a pilot. He had been in a weather reconnaissance crew all through World War II. And he was both a pilot and a navigator and a weather guy, which is something I always liked too. So I guess I got that from him. But he liked to fly in small planes. And we weren't super rich by any way, but he did stuff that only rich people got to do. Instead of paying for flying time and joining a flying club, which would have been almost possible on our finances, he volunteered to wash all the planes in the club, and they had 9. Everything from a twin Beechcraft corporate back then, radial engine, beautiful aircraft, by the way, all the way down to something called a Taylorcraft, which was really a cool two-seat plane that would do aerobatics. It was a clip wing. So I did all that with my dad, and then this is like a normal Saturday would be Saturday morning, go chop eucalyptus wood, go to the dump, take all the trash, mow the lawn, all that stuff. And then by 3 o'clock, we'd hot it to the airport and get in the plane and go to aerobatics. And
Hmm.
he put 4x4s on the pedals so I could reach them. And then he'd take off and he'd try to scare me to death. So we were doing tailspins, loops, wing overs, you name it. He was an aerobatic pilot. He was very good. So I was doing that as a little kid. Plus, we were on the coast, so I was surfing with my friends, and everybody in my family was required to be a musician. I wanted to be a drummer. So I was a drummer for a while, but I pretty much sucked at that, even though I knew what the beats were and all that. And then somebody just gave me a French horn and said, "Hey, have you ever tried this?" And I fell in love. And so
Hmm.
I became a classical French horn player and became a professional musician and played low chairs. I was never, well, I was first chair um, in the Winston-Salem Symphony for 2 weeks once. I actually beat the guy who was my teacher, who was the first chair. And so I got a big pay raise for 2 weeks and then went back to getting almost nothing again because the rest of the chairs weren't paid much.
Mm.
But I was in the National Symphony and all kinds of symphonies in the American South. And right now I'm in Columbia, South Carolina, which is in the lower half of the East Coast of what's known as the United States now,
Hmm.
which in
Hmm.
colonial times was called Carolina, and it involved both North and South Carolina as they exist today. And I got here after going to Flathead County High School and skiing on the ski team, and then going to university at Chapel Hill in North Carolina. I got here because a friend of mine that I went to college with was working with a guy named Charles Duell. And Charles Duell owns Middleton Place, and his family was some of the first rice planters in this area. And this was a major rice production area during the colonial era. And before that, it was a major native wild rice production area too. So this all came together with hanging out at Middleton Place, which is gorgeous. If anybody looks it up, it's like phenomenal architecture. And I was deep into architecture too. And I was restoring old buildings and doing all kinds of weird stuff after I was in the Air Force flying and sailed around the world and whatever. So it all gets boring after that. But the bottom line is something about rice just kept bothering me because my mom used to have it flown on a Pan Am pilot's briefcase who was in Aiken, South Carolina, where she grew up. He'd get fresh rice right out of the field, have it hand pounded, bag it, put it in his flight bag, and then haul it to San Diego on a Pan Am cross-country flight. And we'd be standing there waiting for the plane to pull up. That's when they had tri-tail TWA Connies, as they were called. They were gorgeous.
Hmm.
And he'd come out with his stuff, and he looked really official in the uniform and everything. And he'd hand mom the bag, and she'd like kiss him and tell him he was a wonderful guy. And it wasn't a romantic thing. She was just freaking out because she would only eat rice that was grown where he lived.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and she had lived. So I
The
didn't understand.
juxtaposition of that like ancient technology with like aviation. I mean,
Yeah.
the next level would be like using a teleporter to get mammoth meat from like 20,000 BC.
Yeah, it was really the juxtaposition and the contrast with everything because this rice was hand planted too and
Mm.
hand managed.
Hmm.
And it's because there was an internationally famous division of what's now a Minnesota seed company in Aiken, South Carolina, where my mother grew up. And Aiken, South Carolina was during World War II and post-World War II was where some of the most powerful people in the world came to have private conferences, including Winston Churchill and everybody, how to deal with the world post-World War II. So my mom was feeding some of those guys in the 40s before the war, and then again right after the war before she moved back to her home state, which was Delaware. So she was in the food business, and she was a phenomenal cook, and she was really rice oriented. So we had rice with every meal, and our pets, I was the chef for the pets. Mom would not let me cook. She thought I sucked as a chef, and I think she was probably right. I'm okay cooking for two, but if it's for 10, I have a nervous breakdown. And I've
Hmm.
run restaurants all over the world and hotels too. And it's really funny. I'm really great with running them. I'm suck on the line, unfortunately. So, but when it comes to small plates and stuff like that, I really like it as long as I'm not interrupted.
Yeah.
So now in my labs, I get to do anything I want and no one's allowed in there, so I can't get interrupted. And that's how the sensory ideas came on. And I skipped over the fact that we all were in the wine trade professionally.
Mm.
Um, I worked with Reeves Hughes III, whose nickname was Chip, and he worked for the best wine companies in the United States. I had introduced him to a friend of mine, Manny Burke, who has rare wines, and our study of ancient to colonial to antebellum to contemporary foods in the American South started with Madeira
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
Emmanuel Burke. He owns rare wines, and Madeira is a focus of his. And he's a wonderful man. His wife was a chemist, a world famous chemist too. They're both of them brilliant, nice people. So I had that kind of background, and I had the exposure to the wine trade because all growing up, my mom was either cooking for somebody or going to a winery or something because she had a restaurant in Marin and a restaurant in La Jolla. And I used to ride in the car with her, and we'd go out to see the Franciscan monks and get wine out of the cask and put it in gallon glass jars and haul it back to her restaurant. I didn't know she was getting it for almost nothing comparatively, and those wines were spectacular. And we grew up on American Kool-Aid. So that
Hmm.
is one half water and one half wine, starting from little teeny ages. You wouldn't do that today, I don't think, but we did it. And it was
Mm.
loads of fun. My sister and I used to have wine parties. We thought we were really celebrating. Of course, it wasn't doing anything to us, but making us slosh around. So,
Yeah.
but we were tasting what was in there. So the sensory development happened there. And that's gone all the way through to me ending up in Charleston, working with Charles Middle at Milton Place, Charles Duell, and growing rice there because he always grew rice there. And I just decided at one point, I'm going to stop building hotels. I'm going to stop building restaurants. I'm just going to start growing rice. I don't know why. I just did it.
Mm. Mm. Now, it's interesting you mentioned wine. I was already thinking of asking the question, should the concept of terroir be applied to human cultures? And is that kind of what we've lost during this excursion into the industrial era?
I think that's a beautiful statement, number one. Number two, the plants doesn't do not know that we lost terroir. And I think you cannot grow anything from tomatoes to cucumbers to wheat to corn if it has, here's the test later phrase, phenotypic plasticity, which means it will react like terroir. That's what grapes do for wine. They react to the terroir, they react to the season, they react to light, they react to too many clouds, they do all kinds of things. And the best of the ancient staples and the best of the ancient vegetables have those same traits. In Mendelian culture, you want to stabilize and shoot for a certain set of non-place based identity things that then you can plant that same plant anywhere and it's the same plant. So in Mendel's time, as it hit here, we lost the ability to reflect what wheat tastes like, especially a certain cultivar of wheat from Wisconsin versus the same wheat grown in Appalachia down here in South Carolina. 800 to 1200 mile separation. The taste of the Landrace, the earliest, and that's not confused with heirloom, which is only the last 50 years. And now we're starting to see even some GMO activity in that 50 years ago thing. It was always done by hand,
Mm.
right? Hand to hand. That's Landrace. Uh, Mendelian can be in heirloom, so we don't use the term much anymore, heirloom, for this, even though I love it for culinary interpretation because it does tell you something about the way people thought about flavor and aroma and
Mm.
terroir.
Mm.
But we see no difference between the finest wine development in the world and any grain, legume, oilseed, or any other staple that we work with. We're looking for terroir. We don't care about yield because if we get terroir, reflection, we know the land race is responding to its place-based identity preserve location. When we split it and move it someplace else, and then bring it back in year two and combine it and grow it in the same field, it gets more vigorous because it knows it has neighbors that were successful someplace else. And you start thinking about how native people in our country and people all over the world actually referred to ancient crops in terms of relationships, like their mother. This is your mother. And that's true on our continents for all native people. Corn is mother.
Mm.
And it takes on human and identity and presence. And if you actually look at it that way, it starts speaking to you. And I learned that from the Kootenai Indians in Idaho planting uh, with them. They would get on their side right next to the ground and talk to the seeds as they were putting them in the ground.
Wow.
They did not teach me what they were saying, but their corn was phenomenal,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
Well, it's a thing I've been wondering about lately is that, like, and I do this too. I do like mass variety trials. I'll tap into a gene bank and I'll get like 20 or 30 varieties of a crop that I haven't grown much before, just to like see all of that diversity. But I wonder if that approach to finding and developing local land races potentially misses something, that it's trying to fast forward a process which is better done little by little, like just a few varieties at a time. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, we have some practical philosophies on it because when I started seriously in 1998, and I was goofing around with it 3 years earlier too, but when I got really serious, I said, okay, I've got to do this. I really don't know why, but I have to, and I didn't know anything. Essentially, rices, even landrace rices, especially ancient ones, in this country, no matter where they were from, when you planted them in this country, they were assumed to be non-promiscuous, like corn can be. If you plant one version of corn next to another cultivar of corn, they're going to cross,
Hmm.
especially if their pollination windows overlap, obviously. Uh, and we spent 3 years thinking that didn't happen with rice, and all of a sudden we started getting crosses.
Hmm.
And pretty soon we had to buffer it, and pretty soon it was just as bad as maize. And it all happened within the first 8 years. And we were under the impression that it just happened while we were doing it, which is silly because rice has been promiscuous forever. So one thing you do when you're doing plots is now we have to buffer all the plots. And we worry about downdraft coming out of Africa because we get wild pollen from there too. And like we have a huge storm going on right now. God knows what it's sending us for our seed plots on the east coast of the United States. We've seen Africa contamination in our field, and contamination sounds negative. Actually, it can be quite positive too, because we get new cultivars. So
Yeah, yeah,
your question is multi-diverse, and the answer for us is we're looking for what's different in the field all the time. But we aren't allowed to do what we used to do unless we do it on purpose.
yeah,
And
yeah.
some of the best hand breeders in the world actually put those together so that they can breed that way and do natural crosses and see what happens, and then pick what they like of all of it.
The way I'm starting to look at it is that there's this balance between optimization and diversity, and it's a bit like that old quote, like "Lord, make me pure, but not yet." And but rather than not yet, like not 100%, like you want like 1% weird outcrosses and variations and mutants popping up in the field at a rate that the growers can pay attention to them and notice if there's something that's potentially useful in the mix that could be the next landrace for that region.
It's true. And we have a rule for maize that actually is quite old in the South, which is if you have corn from anywhere that comes to you with place-based identity preserved traits and has characteristic description you can count on for even centuries, you forget that there's geniuses with hands that know and eyes that know and souls that know what that plant's supposed to be. And you get it if you don't know what that plant's supposed to be and you don't pay very close attention. In 3 years, you might as well put your name on it, even
Yeah,
if it's thousands of years old, because it's not the same plant anymore.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
yes, I agree with you wholeheartedly. And ours, um, our work in Europe, especially, um, everything that we do there because the cultures are much older, as we know. And if you go to your neck of the world, you find stuff that's thousands of years old, really, really enticing.
Mm,
But we actually look for the stuff that's different on purpose,
mm,
even though we're working with uniformity. And right now, we're here in the United States, we're doing short season stuff. So everything we're doing is looking for that sport, if you will, or a spontaneous outcross or whatever that's faster than the other crops because we want to be able to scatter these seeds on top of the ground after a catastrophic event and have food for wildlife and people as soon as possible.
I'll make a note. We'll definitely get back to talking about those ultra short season crops. I think that's an amazing
You
project that
bet.
you're working on. I do want to ask a general question before we get into talking about specific crops. And
Yeah.
so many people that I interview came to agriculture from a really outsider perspective. And I wonder, like, what advantages do you think your very diverse background with music and restaurants and art and culture and aviation? I almost don't have time to list them all. What do you think that's how that's given you a different perspective compared to someone who just did an agronomy degree?
Well, I'd have to talk to, for me, um, I'd talk to anyone with an agronomy degree about what they did as kids, to try to figure out where they were coming from. And for me, uh, I had so many distractions, but the one consistent thing was my sister was the ruler of our universe, and she was hugely into plants and animals, huge, and geology.
Mm,
She became a nurse. I'm not sure how she got there from that, but um, the idea of exploring uh, started way early because we used to graft avocado plants. We got paid for it. So we'd graft avocado onto other trees because avocado trees on their own just put the seed in the ground. The cultivars we were working with wouldn't stand. So they'd break off and, you'd have a tree that was 6 years old and all of a sudden it was lying on the ground dead. Um, so we were grafting all kinds of stuff as little kids, got paid well for it, and then we were hand harvesting seed plots for wheat to characteristic description. I had no idea what we were doing, but we were working with farm kids that were juvenile delinquents that got busted in the same field. So they were wearing prison garb, and we were out there doing the same thing they were doing. I always kept asking my sister, I said, "Why are we here? Are we prisoners too? What are we doing?" But we were actually looking for off types in wheat fields, and they
mm,
wanted to save those. They didn't want to throw them away. Like we burn off types in rice fields
mm,
in production, right? Because we don't even want the genetics to survive. If we see it and we know it's really special, then we'll run away with it and hide it somewhere and get it way away from the field so it doesn't contaminate the crop because we need true type replication in production. But in research, anything goes. So your
mm,
question is perfect. Why or what drives that? And the answer is that you're actually working on a level that you cannot see, but you can feel it. In
mm,
our world, you can feel what's going on. And then you always have sensory. And we grind rice leaves and taste the juice. And we sort of know where the plant's going with that. That's way before panicle differentiation. We take wheat stalk and leaves and we do the same thing. We try to figure out where the chlorophyll's going in the plant. What's the vigor? And then we have to have tilth records and we need to know what the soil looks like. So we're actually doing things like planting wheat seeds 3 feet to 6 feet below ground to see how vigorous they are and come up through that. And that is an entirely different plant when they have to do that. I've
mm,
seen wheat studies where the roots are 35 feet long in the Levant.
mm. That makes me wonder that like the scale of commercial agriculture is such that those human-centered sensory tools they don't scale. Like if you're growing 1,000 acres of wheat, there's no way you can use your taste buds or even your own eyes to do much in terms of monitoring it. It's just beyond the scale of one person. That monstrousness of industrial agriculture has dehumanized it like by necessity.
There's an AI answer, and I hate to say
Uh,
it because I'm the last person that would ever go there. But we saw people working with AI at the University of Connecticut and surrounds, at Boston College, almost 20 years ago.
mm,
And they were doing their version of AI with drones and infrared cameras that actually could look below the ground and see rootstock. And they could do it with teeny genetic research fields and great big 1,000-acre fields. These were absolute geniuses, and two of them, the U.S. government took them out of the public domain because their stuff could be co-opted for bioterrorism. I think one of them's sort of back. I'm not sure. I'm supposed to find that out soon. But the point here is with the most advanced technology that was available. This is a long time ago. And I chose to not use drones because I was a pilot and I don't want to fly any more airplanes. I did that forever. Um, so I didn't see airplanes in agriculture, even if they were drones marrying up. But if you look at it now, almost everything's done by drones.
Mm.
One of the largest satellite farm management companies in the world is about 250 miles from where I'm sitting in North Carolina in the middle of nowhere. And you come over a little teeny hill because it's mostly in the flatlands, and you're on a teeny two-lane, way rural road, and you look down the road and you see a clump of trees, and all of a sudden you see a bunch of white things on the other side of the trees, and it's nothing but satellite dishes off to the horizon.
Mhm.
And this room has 180 huge 12-foot by 6-foot screens in it, and all they do is flip from one satellite managed farm to another all the way around the world all day long, 24/7, 365. And
Wow.
I was in there for half a day. I couldn't take it anymore, even though the people working there were really cool. Um, and I finally just went outside, and when they all came out for break, they said, "Hey, what happened to you?" I said, "Well, I watched enough TV for the day, man. Come on, Jesus." I said,
Do
"I
you
like getting,
well, do you share my
yeah."
concerns that that technology, as amazing as it is, might be too fragile to carry humanity into the future? That it's at some point something's going to break, and we need other forms of agriculture that are more resilient?
That is the most topical statement that I've had all day. And I get successions of them all along because I have long drives between the farms. So overnight, I'm listening to the news just because it's there. And the latest one's not even 48 hours old, where they declared that the energy use of AI actually equated with the potential income of AI as something like 3 trillion to 1 or something.
Mm,
That no matter how they do it, the energy use in AI makes no sense against its future value, except to eliminate the human race, which doesn't make any sense.
mm,
So I'm there with you. That satellite thing came out of a farming system that actually was sending teams of very intelligent people all over the world to work on farms. They were the people that in the late 19th century built our seed banks. They collected with permission of locals. They weren't extracting. They actually worked with the locals in the fields to get these. All kinds of einkorns, emmers, wheats, you name it. Building the wheat bank, the tomato bank, the this, that, the other thing. They were working everywhere. Um, Obviously, there were no big screens, AI-driven satellite stuff back then. That seems to make sense to me because for biosecurity, you want to have seed backup. And I thought that was a good move as long as they weren't expropriating culture
mm.
and they had permission and they paid back in value. And I learned that from a guy named Merle Shepard here who had two islands he was responsible for biosecurity for in the Caribbean here in the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean Ocean. And those two islands, I won't name them because it's not really important, although his work was really important. But his idea was no one was supposed to take anything away from the islands. He didn't go down there to take stuff away. He came down there to support what was there and help redevelop what they'd lost.
Mm.
And that's kind of been our philosophy too. So I get it.
Do you think the big seed banks around the world, as amazing and valuable as they are, that they could be a point of vulnerability in the system as well? I know that the GRIN funding was recently kind of thrown into disarray due to political reasons.
No, excuse me, what is the GRIN? Is that existing? That's a joke.
Yeah.
There is no GRIN right now.
Mm.
None. There hasn't been since February 17th,
Hmm.
18th. It started January 28th, but they started shutting them all down and essentially firing all the advanced scientists that were maintaining the grain banks, except for a very few people in this country. Most of them went to work with better paying jobs, by the way, all over the world. So the
Mm.
world gained while the U.S. lost for that one because right now biosecurity rests in our local universities who are not connecting with what we call the USDA GRIN because there's no one home to connect with.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're on a shutdown, but beyond that, It's been very, very difficult. I've done rice research in parallel, both funding and pro bono on my part, funder or working for them for free or whatever, doing crop reps and stuff at the National Rice Research Center for since 2003,
Mm.
and worked hand in hand with Dr. Anna McClung, who retired, and now it's Dr. Yulin Zhao and Dr. Travis Huggins and a bunch of other wonderful people down there, but they can't work in the public domain. It's kind of interesting. And they are the biosecurity arm for rice for the U.S. government and for the seed banks. They work hand in hand with all the seed banks in the American continents. Um, and their work is priceless and they're really good. So I can't knock anything. I just don't understand what's going on.
Mm.
So we
Mm.
work around that. We've got 6 years of biosecurity here, and we have core genetics on the voucher and hedgerow level, and we've got plenty of it, and it's vaulted properly and it's protected from storm. It's not going to get lost from a catastrophic event or anything like that. And so we pull some of that out and grow it and then pass the seed out to everybody. And
Well,
we do that with lots of crops.
I was going to say, do you think that's ultimately the only strategy is to decentralize those genetic resources again, that they need to be put back in the hands of communities rather than put in a vault somewhere?
The only growth trend in American agriculture for now, coming up on 10 years, is women on small farms
Hmm.
doing exactly that, who may or may not articulate it, but
Yeah.
it's exactly what they're doing.
Yeah.
And
Mm.
I'm not talking about just any particular cultural group, it's all of them. Of course, Native people never quit doing that. There are male-dominated biosecurity systems on the American continent, so I don't want to be remiss in saying it's only women, but I happen to like women doing agricultural calls in the field. I don't do anything without women around.
Mm. Mm.
It's not just because they're women, it's because somehow they have better insights than I do. And I've heard this nonstop since I started.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
Farmer John's really successful. Man, he knows when to make a call. He's amazing. You go talk to Farmer John, you hang, you go have dinner, talk, talk, talk. Pretty soon you find out, well, his wife actually did make the call. Time to harvest, John, right?
Yeah.
That came from a woman.
Interesting.
Interesting
Interesting.
is right.
Yeah. I think
Yeah,
there's theories that domestication of plants probably happened through women as well.
definitely. The native women won all the corn shows in the north central part of the United States, where they used to build great big castles out of corn, like big ones, like 400 feet tall, out of corn cobs,
Mm.
right? They'd have big, this is Iowa. And native women won every breeding contest for almost 20 years, and they just got tired of going, so they quit, and then everybody else started winning.
Mm.
But
Mm.
they won them all without even trying. And I've watched three native cultural communities do their own breeding and walked with some of them, which is they have to walk in order to figure out who you are. They don't see you sitting down or static in those tribes. And uh, native women there were consulting, right? Way ahead of anybody in the field. And they were looking at the plants on a 360 basis that I still cannot do myself. And I spent lots of time trying to learn. I suck. But I spent lots of time with them, and boy, I revere what they can do because they can grow corn in a little pile of compost in an asphalt parking lot.
Mm.
It's crazy. I've
You,
seen it done.
you'll have to have some sympathy for us in Australia, where our connection to that deeper cultural, agricultural ancestry is almost completely severed. Like we have very limited genetic resources. We have some. I'm grateful for what we can get. But yeah, tapping into the culture of how to grow and manage and even use various, particularly staple crops is we're almost starting from zero here. Other than our very present but very remote Aboriginal history of interacting with the plants of the continent as well. So it's a big challenge over here. So, but I want to talk before we talk about your work with
I need to
maize.
add something
Oh,
in
yes,
here.
yes.
I promised I promised myself I would. No one asked me to do this, but
Mm.
I should do this. My darling wife's brother, his name is Louis Rentschler, and he works with the Aboriginal tribes on biosecurity and crops.
Hmm.
And he's a wonderful man. He's brilliant. Went to Oxford, went to Heidelberg. Usually speaks 6 languages fluently. Plus, he's learned some native languages in Australia as well. But he grew up a baseball player in Ohio, go figure.
Huh.
And I don't know how the hell he's translated it to working. He was doing both tree, fruit horticulture, and ground crops for full farm husbandry biodynamic level.
Hmm.
And it had a grant system behind him that worked with underserved communities only in Australia. I can't tell you where it was because I don't remember. But Louis Rentschler is a really cool guy, and he could have been retired and not doing that. He just decided he'd do it. Nobody even knows why. He didn't do it for anything I said, for sure,
Mm.
because he's can run circles around me smart wise, but
That
it's
sounds
pretty
like someone I
amazing what
need
he's
to
done.
talk to. I'm going to track him down. Thank you for mentioning that.
I'll share his stuff with you if you want.
And before we talk about your particular work with maize, I just thought to ask, I read a book by Buffalo Bird Woman from the Lakota tribe about
Yeah.
her like pre-contact tribe's agricultural practice, and it mentions as well like there's a relatively recent memory in her history of when corn and beans first arrived in her part of the United States. And I wonder if there's echoes of lessons about that agricultural transformation that happened not that long before Europeans came to North America as corn spread, all over the place and transformed itself and cultures as it moved. Do you have any kind of
Ah.
insights into that process, or is
Well,
most of it kind of lost?
I have outsights, not
Mm.
insights.
Ah.
And they are uh, the ancient trade routes.
Mm.
And we still have a strong argument that maize made it to Europe um, from the east and not the west. We
Mm.
still have a huge disparity between the actual age of maize on these continents and what is considered to be the real age of maize. And I lived with the Kuna in the Caribbean, a very interesting society. Um, that had 9 levels of existence and was obviously men were the elders, but women were the rulers. And it was a very subtle ruling. Anything that was agricultural, women were doing it. They had all kinds of very incredible practices. And especially with maize, they were doing things that I still have not seen anyplace else. From that experience, their idea of history on the 9 levels involved more than 100,000 years of human presence in their particular area, which is in the western part of the Caribbean, on the islands just south of what we know as Panama today. They're very remote, and their version of history, I wouldn't disbelieve. So, taking that and then the work I've done with Native people since I was a kid, because my sister was huge into that. Um, and then as I did it for real when I grew up and started supporting things on the mesas and things like that, asking nothing in return because I knew you shouldn't, and not taking anything that I didn't culturally have a hand in. Uh, that was hard learned. And what I see is that when I started in 1995 and when I got serious in 1998, Um, it was pretty much agreed, and there were fights over this because I had a professor at Chapel Hill who actually was one of the people that was having the fight. And he was having a fight with a similar scientist in New England about anthropological evidence and the genetics associated with that. So he was a polymath uh, that was both a geneticist and an anthropologist, a kind of lethal combination. And he was a maize historian to boot. Really interesting guy. And he contended that there was multiple centers of origin for maize. He contended that it wasn't as old as everybody thought it was. I think he was going for 12,000 years presence on the American continents. The guy in New England who actually won that argument was working at Nakeets, which is the center of maize culture for all native peoples in the Americas. It goes north and south from there and covers everything.
Mm.
Uh, and those histories are now dating past 40,000 years presence on the planet, where it only used to be, it was just common knowledge. Everything, this is not more than 10,000 years of maize, and native presence wasn't much more than that here when I started.
Mm,
Now, everybody knows it's more than 40,000. My guess is it's at least twice to three times that, and maybe even more.
mm.
I mean, we've got stuff we're digging up now, which we can age date with advanced analytics that really don't jive with any of that. And so that science
Interesting.
is ongoing. Yeah,
Interesting. That is
yeah,
fascinating.
totally. Way
It's
over my pay grade.
it's
I'm,
it's almost dizzying when you get your worldview kind of thrown out by like an order of two of magnitude.
yeah, I just listened to what everybody told me. I worked with native people. I've worked with the tribes here. They're phenomenal,
Mm,
really phenomenal. And there's a woman in the Lumbee tribe here that's incredible. She just woke up one day and she said, "I've got to take my PhD." And then she called me and I said, I said, "I'm a dope, man, but I know really smart scientists. You want to talk to one? What are you going to take it in?" She said, "Well, I think I should take it in maize." I said, "Okay, well, then I know Jim Holland, but you're talking about somebody that does know native culture and is sensitive to it. But, you know what American science is. They're all these geneticists don't stop to think. They give numbers to stuff that you do. There's no such thing as a number for a corn, even though I understand why it's like that."
mm.
And so she's now got her postdoc PhD, and she went back and created a museum, and it's killer. And she
Yeah.
just did it all on her own. She just woke up one day and said, "I'm doing that." And I happened to be up there just talking about stuff and helping with rematriation of one particular cultivar of maize that belonged to them.
Mm,
So anything can happen. One of the fabulous things about that is that no matter how suppressed or what catastrophic events happen, this culture is incredibly resilient, and the strength of its charge back from the edge, and we know that from Helene, which wiped out a major section of Appalachia right through a town we call Asheville.
mm.
Just massive, massive outflows of water taking out everything. And the wind blew down all the trees to boot. So it was a mess. And they're just recovering, just really starting to recover now. And that was 2 years ago. So when we have stuff like that, it's amazing who steps up. And it's always in the background, it's always the most vulnerable are native people to our region, the most culturally connected and the most intelligent, and the people who always come back.
Yeah.
The big deal about that culture in this country, especially in New England, is we drove those local native cultures out of New England as we transgressed into their own property and took it over. They came back three times during catastrophic losses and replanted maize to keep people from starving.
Yeah.
And so their maize could have a home base, place-based identity preserved.
Now, that reminds me of a question. So, do you suspect that annual based agriculture is actually more resilient to disasters than perennial? And I would make the example of the Amazonian civilization that we only just recently realized was there. It was mostly based on perennial staples and tree crops versus the Andean peoples, and they were both like hit really hard by the epidemics that were introduced. And the Amazonians disappeared without a trace, or almost without a trace, whereas the Andeans somehow managed to come back, and they're probably one of the most intact of the New World cultures from that disaster.
I agree with you. The severity of pestilence brought by contact with European culture from outside wiped out everything uh, on first contact in the Caribbean and Mexico. Just any tribe that had that until they gained the resistance. Um, and particularly when you speak of South America, the ability to run up the mountain was not uh, an attribute of career Marine people in the explorer sector. Neither was it a Jesuit function. The Jesuits could just get out and run up a 12,000-foot mountain without even dropping or taking a breath.
Mm.
Uh, but I've actually seen native people do that without even trying. In fact, we have one person here that can do that. His name's Euphren Ninacoro Ramos, and he has a master's from Earth University in horticulture, and he can see the inside of plants, and he can also run all day without getting out of breath.
Wow.
He's a freaking amazing man. And he's a polymath too. He's got a photographic memory. He's an amazing guy. So, in learning from all those things, we find out that those cultures were first devastated and then came back fiercely until pretty much Texas. And that battle's not over. The native battles in Texas and the native battles here, the war of when they purged every native person out of this region in the 1700s, pretty horrible. And we didn't get viability on the coast for probably a century.
Mm.
Just the native people from the mountains were visiting the coast. So we wiped out all the tribes. It was not good. And I still, to this minute, am not sure because that led to what we call a civil war. Because once the native people were gone, there wasn't any leavening influence with what was going on with agriculture. And it just went nuts. And we appropriated everything here. So that history is a mess. It's also phenomenal. If you dig into it, slavery comes in when we run native people out, it comes in huge because
Mm.
they didn't have native people anymore and they were enslaved. Um, and that really just continued to domino. So that effect of displacing native people, worst thing in the world. The one thing I think people don't understand is that the arable land, the amount of cultivated food lands on the east coast of the United States going in 200 miles was exactly the same in 1500 as it is today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And most people just don't even have a ken for that. They don't understand that these societies were traveling. I mean, uh, the tribe were trading all the way to South America from here
Mm-hmm.
in
Mm-hmm.
South Carolina
Mm.
and all the way to Nova Scotia in ocean-going canoes.
Uh, Talking about maize in particular, but in New World crops in general, do you think that the domesticated plants of the New World are more fully domesticated than the ones of the Old World, where livestock and technology kind of compensated for difficulties in like management and processing, whereas like maize is so dramatically transformed compared to its ancestors, and you can grow it with like a digging stick and a little bit of ash. Whereas for wheat, you need all of these tools and animals and grinding stones. Like it's so much more complicated. And they could have just domesticated wheat another stage, similar to what happened with maize, but they never got around to it because they had all of this machinery to do it to compensate for its limitations.
That's a complicated question. Let me kind of take that apart a second. So, one, we tend to underestimate the technology of native people who were better at conserving crops than we ever have been, period.
Mm,
Biosecurity, they take knocks all the time because there was famine in Mexico when Cortez arrived and things like that. It was well documented by Jesuits.
mm,
But the reason why there was famine in Mexico was because the tribes were warring themselves.
hmm
And Cortez walked right in the middle of it. I don't think he knew it was coming, and they were right next to getting wiped out. Here, they actually did get wiped out. They went from Savannah, they were going to go north. They went out there looking for gold, and they never came back.
mm,
That had to be a whole second thing. So the places where native people were welcoming, like we have one of the oldest water sources on the planet in a place called Hilton Head, which is right in the center on the east coast of this state. Hilton Head's in sort of an island, or it's surrounded by water mostly. And then there are islands out there, and right in the middle of that, there's rock that sticks up that everybody's been getting water from since God knows when. Some people actually are starting to document the fact that it's possible that people from Norway were getting water from that rock before anybody thought about first contact here,
mm,
because they were coming in through Greenland, Iceland, and down the East Coast. So I know about that, but how does that relate with survivability, and how does it trade-off against the rapid technology. The division for me is deciding to weaponize the economy of staples.
Mm,
The stock market was founded on crops,
mm-hmm,
and it began in the upper Midwest of the United States, and then somehow went to Delaware. Go figure. Something about gunpowder and DuPont, cannon fire, and then how to make weapons useful in agriculture when you didn't need them. So that was gunpowder as what we call fertilizer. And that's the whole chemical revolution, to the point where the chairman of DuPont was so upset with himself having let everybody do that, including himself. He had an epiphany and he was fired as chairman of his own board of the company he owned.
mm,
And he wrote a book called Shucks, Shocks, and Hominy Blocks. And that book, in some 118 pages or so, documents anything you need to be on a subsistence level and biosecure for your family and your neighbors. And it talks about exactly what it takes to, it still works today. If you move the middle of nowhere and follow everything in that book and do it, and you have some seed when you get there, you're biosecure, even with catastrophic events, because it even speaks about how to protect crops. And
mm-hmm,
that's pretty rare.
mm,
So I think that the move to local food production and the consistent way we look at biosecurity, because biosecurity is the model. Biosecurity is out in front of us about 30 to 50 years, it should be farther than that, but that's what it is. And we don't do biosecurity really well just with CRISPR inventing the genes to make
mm,
up food plants, even though they're doing it. I mean, that's happening all over the world. That would be great, but where are they getting the models for that? They all come out of what we call heirlooms or land-raised plants. They have to actually study those very, very carefully, because they leave things out and then they plant stuff, and all of a sudden 10 years out they realize that they missed something. And that's
mm.
been going on since before World War II.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's the one gene, one trait paradigm for
Exactly.
plant breeding is so fragile.
Totally.
Oh,
So if you're not using the whole genome, if you don't know it really well, you actually don't know what you have, no matter
yeah,
how smart you are, no matter how good your science is. Yeah.
it's too much
And I don't have
information.
any, I used to have a lot of objection to breeding technology, but at this point, with global warming going what it is, I'm actually seeing colors in rice leaves I've never seen before with
Hmm.
no chemical growing. We're talking about native till,
Yeah.
and it doesn't get any better than that. That's nothing's brought onto the field but seed.
Mm,
And in a perfect system, you've got perennials that drop seed that actually reinforce themselves and they just continue like forever.
mm,
And they can all be land raised too, because there are perennial land races, as we know. Red rice, what we call weedy red rice, is a perennial rice crop, and it actually tastes really good,
mm,
right?
mm,
It doesn't hold overnight and then heat back really well. That's the only thing it doesn't do. But if you want to consume, you cook exactly what you want to consume, it's actually quite good. And we
mm.
call it weedy rice, and it's
Man,
perennial.
I could talk to you about specific crops for hours, like absolutely hours. The stuff you're doing, and I don't want to take your whole day, your whole night, but I was going to talk about specific maize varieties. We're taking too long, but can we talk a bit about your work with buckwheat? Because I've talked to many people about breeding various mazes, but I've never had a chance to talk to anyone about buckwheat. And what's been your experience working with it?
Well, I cheated, okay, just for starters,
Hmm.
because my mom grew buckwheat when I was a little teeny kid in her garden because she liked the flowers. And then she liked to eat buckwheat raw because she grew up growing it. And and she liked the leaves because they're actually excellent when you get them very young, et cetera, et cetera. So we're talking her variety of buckwheat was pre what we call Mancan and Mandan, which took over the mid market for buckwheat production. We have a company that's international here named Mindak, and most of their the export's huge, and most of their export is going to Asia.
Mm,
But what we have here in the country, it's interesting. It was a Canadian breeder that did it, but essentially most of the people are growing Canadian bred buckwheat. So when you talk about buckwheat, we look at the north, certainly Maine, going all the way across the top states and what's now the United States, if you took the Canadian border off, which is sort of um, an oxymoron right now, given the political situation, excuse me for even mentioning it,
Mm.
but if you took the border away and you said, okay, that's all just one territory, it was unified for buckwheat from here. Buckwheat was actually part of the production for the stock exchange
Oh
because
wow.
the main center of research for continental America was right here, not more than 40 miles from where I'm sitting. But they brought in people from Sweden and Norway to be the farmers who knew that crop inside and out. And they hated it here so much that they left the town. And if you go to the town now, it is perfectly preserved from the early 1800s.
Huh.
Churches, houses, they brought church pews, they brought livestock, pets, furniture. You go into some houses and the furniture is absolutely pristine from that era. There's only three or four places that I know of that are like that in the American South, but
Mm.
that's one. It's only 40, 50 miles from here.
Mm. Mm.
That migration went from there to where? Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them stayed there, and some of them kept going right back up into Canada. So buckwheat came in through Maine, went down Appalachia, and went over to swum the river, as they call it, to what's called New Orleans. So you have the same exact buckwheat culture in Maine and New Orleans, seriously, separated by a continent and a bunch of the difference between a lot of people, you're going to like this one. People say the difference between where buckwheat was planted in Maine first and where buckwheat migrated, not that long afterwards, is the difference in what's called the holler. And in the north, the holler is yee-haw, right? And in New Orleans, it's aye, because they're below sea level. And you're up in the altitudes when you go
Yeah.
north.
Yeah.
So that's actually a buckwheat deal. The other thing with buckwheat are people that carried the seed around in their pockets and would
Mm.
plant it because it grows quickly, as we both know, and it was a staple crop. And so when you're talking cultivars, Tartary is pretty much Tartary buckwheat, which has the true Tartaries. There's lots of them, but the true Tartaries have bright saffron yellow endosperm. So
Mm-hmm.
when you make porridge with it, it's bright saffron yellow. And that's not just because it's young, because it keeps that yellow color way past it going dormant. Whereas most buckwheats are green and then they go to light brown as they go into their anaerobic phase. So those cultivars, Tartary shows up in genetics for stabilization because one, it's low stature. It's always been low stature. Two, it's absolutely friggin' totally fast. I mean, you can get a crop out with heat in less than 40 days from
Mm-hmm.
direct seed. So on and on and on. So all the reasons why we like buckwheat, it'll also self-propagate itself. It'll drop its stuff and then come back as soon as it's got enough heat to start over again.
Is that part of the reason why it managed to move so quickly from a warmer region to a much colder region because it's got such a short season? You can just adjust the timing of the management in that season in multiple different locations.
Yeah, we're back to phenotypic plasticity, and the
Mm.
more tolerances inherent in the plants, and if you look hard at how buckwheat traveled, we assume still at this time, although here we go again with the Trans-African Trail, we assume that buckwheat normally comes to us through Kublai Khan out of the Far East into the Mediterranean region, then up into Scotland, Ireland, and then Sweden and Norway. And that is way long time ago. That wasn't recent. So we assume that, but there's evidence to say that through the uh, through the trading islands, which are off the coast of East Africa in the northern section, especially the island of Madeira and surrounds, that buckwheat came around the Horn that way, but there are also arguments that buckwheat somehow came from the west to the
Interesting.
east.
Interesting.
And you see this in Peru, where you've got conflict for how crops got there, either from Indonesia and Polynesia, or did it actually come around the Horn?
Yeah.
And it all gets garbaged up in trade routes. So the answer for buckwheat is it survives anywhere it is, and its phenotypic plasticity drives incredible changes. Like tartary can morph to blue endosperm, it can morph to pink. From that yellow, it can go all green. It can be solid white. It can be dark brown, and it can have black too.
Mm,
And you're looking at that, and once you start seeing that plasticity, that change, and its reaction to terroir, it's vicious.
mm,
And that
mm,
goes to so many of the most ancient plants because they do that for survival. And that's a very quiet set of genes that they breed now. They were ignoring it for a long time, but now they're breeding that resilience into some modern crops. Good, bad, or indifferent, it's probably a step in the right direction.
mm. And I definitely wanted to spend some time talking about your work developing ultra short season crops because buckwheat is like kind of the natural example of this, but you have been exploring this trait in other species. Can we talk more about that?
Sure. And I guess it's probably best to start with einkorn and our work in Europe with Anders Borgen, who had the same mission. And there were about 10 other scientists that, and this is Eurocentric, but it happened all over the world. So I don't mean to just point out Europe, but that's where I got to to get educated. Some friends of mine, Elrigosa being right up there at the top, CJ Lon, who they had a huge seed company in Maine, and they were into landrace genetic research themselves, looking for that same resilience, working with the University of Massachusetts, as a matter of fact, hands-on in the case of Elrigosa. And she brought Anders over, so that's how I met him, because she knew his work, and he was working on super fast buckwheats and wheats and all kinds of cultivars, and he was working from Luxembourg all the way down to the Riviera. And his major place was the Haute-Provence, where he was working with the most ancient versions of einkorn he could get his hands on. And just in case everybody doesn't know what einkorn is, it is a precursor to wheat. It's considered to be the oldest domesticated cereal grain in the wheat family uh, in human culture. I'm not sure that that's really a fair statement these days because it's going back and forth now somewhat between emmer and wheat.
Mm,
But einkorn is the one grain because its genetics are the simplest of all the cereal wheats. And emmer is more complicated, and then you get to spelt, and then you keep going, and essentially you're building the entire wheat system, which goes on to dizzying heights of variety and plant traits. But all of those earliest ones, those emmers, those einkorns, those spelts, were dwarf and super fast in the field. From that work with Anders, looking at how fast einkorns could actually do, they just sit there and look like crabgrass. They come up, 3 weeks, they got ahead, they're gone. You cut them, and it's just crabgrass again.
yeah.
Those fastest ones. They're amazing. And there are polyculture crops that are both perennials in your set of the world, and I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, that are related on genetic expression like that, but they're outside the class of what we would call wheat. But they're incredibly nutritious and they're really resilient and they can take almost anything. And those are the crops when we wanted to do work with the tribes in the Sahara in Africa and things like that, where you make a cone and you have a drip system and you put 3 seeds in the bottom of it and stick it in the middle of a sand dune and walk away. And night times would be very cold and they'd get condensation into the funnel. The funnel would drop on the seeds would come up and it would feed itself and start creating a pasture, quote unquote, in the middle of dunes.
Mm,
And that work was the most stunning I've ever seen in my life. I had no idea it was going on, and I didn't have anything to do with starting it, but I did perceive it. I actually saw it, and I'm going, this is impossible. We're creating oases in the
yeah.
Sahara
Yeah.
with landrace seeds that were thousands of years old. Some of them didn't even have identities, but they belonged to the nomad culture.
Mm,
And we could go and trade, we being those scientists could go and trade and get those and plant them. So everything we're looking at certainly in that system, those were 30 days and down to full edible plants. And you could eat the entire plant. And you need it. You need chlorophyll. You need all kinds of stuff. So you can actually make juice. People juice leaves all the time. It's no biggie, right? So you can consume the whole plant. So the nutrition aspects is phenomenal. And you can parch the grains themselves and then treat 3 times the nutrition spread there. Those particular cultivars were the most resilient I've ever seen in my life.
Mm,
And that's where I got the idea that maybe we should work with polyculture to have the plants feed themselves and possibly be perennial or not. I didn't care, and
mm,
I still don't. I think perennial plants are really, really important. Obviously, we have trees that I don't want to go away. I don't know whether you call them perennial or not, but they've been around for hundreds of years. So I like the idea. But the idea of having acorns, like the acorn fall just started 3 days ago here. And it reminds me every year of how ancient that is. And that used to be chestnuts here.
hmm
This
hmm
was the most dense chestnut area in the United States on natural occurring chestnut trees. Massive chestnut trees.
I take the loss of the North American chestnuts as another case
Lesson.
study of the lack of resilience of perennial food systems that the European settlers were using those trees that they inherited, and when they died off, they just planted more wheat and corn. They didn't make an effort to even plant Asian chestnuts to replace the lost American chestnuts. They just kind of gave up and shifted to something that gave a quicker return.
I have a interesting perspective for you that could have been. I like this. I don't know. I'm not a historian either. I need to make sure I am not an academic at all. They call me the tractor donkey. That's my nickname when all the geneticists are around. Mostly what I hear is "Shut up, Glenn." I think I have an idea and I start to express it and they're just rolling their eyes and go, "Could you just be quiet for a second? We're trying to get something done here." So just, and they're not being mean. They're just, they have an agenda. They've got a lot to do, and I get it. And
Mm,
every once in a while, I get an idea that they actually listen to.
mm,
So I keep trying. So it works. And by the way, if you quit, you haven't accomplished anything. Even if you're screwing up, keep doing,
mm,
right?
mm,
So in this case, in this case, you've got uh, chestnut trees and you've got George Washington Carver. And there is a racist interpretation of this, which I refuse to go there because I don't think that it's going to help anyone because George Washington Carver was incredibly successful. So forget the racist issue. And we have it everywhere in the world, no matter what we wish. And I think it needs to get cured permanently. But this one, we there wasn't a race designation for this. When Carver started working with peanuts, nobody really cared because they had chestnuts. What do they need peanuts for? They just
mhm,
fell out of the tree and you do it. You don't have to plant anything or go harvest it. Just go pick it up and roast it and you're done. I grew up doing that. That was fun.
mm,
So um, we had peanuts. So you're right. When the chestnut trees died, instead of having the chestnut trees fall over and die and letting new ones come up under them, we were starting to replace the chestnut groves with peanuts. But what really happened was there was introduction of Asian chestnuts, which started essentially what we'd call a plague and
mm.
took out the entire chestnut population of American chestnuts. We have American chestnuts that are still indigenous to this state. They're about 300, 400 years old,
Wow.
and they're in the middle of the state. Nobody really knows where they are. I've seen them. And frankly, I don't even know how I got there because we had to go on a really long hike. But you could tell they were chestnuts because they had chestnuts in the tree,
Hmm.
but they were huge,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And modern Asian chestnuts are rounder, shorter, things like that. American chestnuts are more vertical, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the bottom line on all that is it's a conflicted story like so many things.
Mm.
But we actually let it happen instead of moving against it. We imported chestnuts.
Mm.
That's
With
a yeah.
with these really short season annual crops, do you think they could be used as a kind of polyculture in time rather than space to make so you could like do like ultra fast crop rotation between different plant families to maintain soil health and diversity in that soil ecology. It isn't just, grass forever, that you could alternate between like grass and buckwheat and maybe a really short season legume. And you could do like multiple crops like that in one season and maintain the convenience of management when you just have one crop to harvest at a time.
You can, and the advantage of working non-perennial, and we do. The advantage of working non-perennial is if the understory can be perennial and it's nutritious for the soil and it's a nutrition builder for the plants that it needs to support. And that looks a lot more like milpa, as we call it in Mexico and South and somewhat up here,
Mm,
where there's up to 14 plants minimum in a system, and they're all feeding off each other symbiotically, and they can all be perennial or not, right? Or they could be half and half. And they're managed by hand, and they're incredibly productive on a nutrition basis. The calorie output for the best of the milpa that I've seen in Tepaniztlahuaca in Mexico, where it goes back to the dawn of human arrival,
mm,
whenever that is, those religious uh, polycultures are mostly not perennial. They're women travel the peaks, and they're about every 5 kilometers or so, kind of 4.5, there's a new shrine, and it's a shrine of plants that are ancient, and there's no less than 12. It's a magic number. I won't go into it because I really was busy just looking at it. I couldn't take my eyes off it, so I didn't listen to anything that was said. I was just looking at every plant as fast as I could go because we needed to move because it was late in the day. They weren't going to tell us about this because they don't usually share that. And then somebody relented because we were all working really hard and they never seen anybody do that up there in the peaks. So we got to see two plots walking along, and they were diverse as I counted more than 20 different plants. Um, Not even a half of them were perennial.
mm,
All different kinds of food plants, but this was a sacramental, and it was the core. It's like our seed bank. Those were the seed banks, but they were also religious.
yeah,
It was
yeah.
really extraordinary to see. And frankly, the difference between perennial and non-perennial is the human hand.
Hmm,
You
hmm.
manage that,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
Um,
If you blink on a perennial crop, it takes over everything, and that's not good.
yeah, yeah. Now, I want to spend a bit of time talking about your perspective for breeding and selecting staple crops that have the potential for lower inputs. And I think this is one of the big advantages of these traditional varieties and the management systems that go along with them. So, do you have any way you want to start with that? Maybe breeding for drought resistance?
Yeah. So the inherent traits, and then it would be a selection and not necessarily breeding, but if you take the hand breeding as part of the breeding thing, definitely, because we've taken crops that are normally running, 60, 70, 80 days to maturity, not just days to PD, for rice or wheat or anything else. So when we take those, we start selecting for the earliest. If we get a tweak, we only have about 5 years, and we've taken a major portion of the days of maturity off of that plant. They're that phenotypically plastic.
Hmm,
So the approach we take is if we get something that's listed at days of maturity for our zone, and it's all changes by zone, as we know, some of them are drastic. Uh, so some of them in Maine won't even grow. And some of them that will grow in Maine that are 40 days in Texas are 90 in Maine.
mm,
And it depends on how you're planting. And then you have also some celestial work that goes into that, that actually was a major part of farming and still should be. And I still know a lot of industrial farmers that are thinking that way too. They actually watch solar, they watch celestial, they're clocking it that way because their ancestors always did it.
mm,
Uh, so you have those variables, and they're essentially limitless. And it forces you to start thinking about when you're doing that, what are you actually trying to accomplish? And can you indeed take care of the plants by not taking care of them?
Yeah, give them an opportunity to express their resilience.
Yes, because if the you never know if the whole makeup of the plant is there and it's just been suppressed, which goes back to seed banks because they make everything regress. You've got to
Mm,
bring them out, split the locations, combine them back, split the locations, you combine them back, then you can put it back for a few years, but you got to pull it out and do it again. Eventually they regress to where they won't even react. You put
mm.
them in and maybe you got 20 bushels an acre first year. Once you increase them, second year you got 18, third year you got 10, and it's not even wanting to grow, and you have to start all over again.
Do you think part of that might be coming from the microbial uh, symbionts with the seeds, that they get lost potentially in seed storage, and that they, at least some of them, have to live in the field where the crops are grown regularly? That this focus
Definitely.
on the plant genome has kind of missed all of that constellation of other biotic factors.
Absolutely. But they've bred against what they have at the present. What they haven't bred yet is the ability for the plant to react,
Mm,
that plasticity.
mm,
They could be doing it and I don't know it. So I take that back because
mm,
there's a lot going on in the last 10 years, way over, way, way over my pay grade. And like I said, I had big problems with all of that until about 10 years ago when I realized that we're all in fast pursuit of something that sustains the planet over the horizon, whatever that horizon is. And it's a individual interpretation thing, or it's a national program, or it's a world program. It frankly doesn't make any difference. You can decide to do this in your own garden and make an impact. But
yeah,
to
yeah.
take it back to where you were, the real identity of how to manage the plants is really how to not manage them and watch for the strength of whatever's in that plant to move. And if
Mm,
it's had Mendelian treatment, it's going to break up to its original combinations, and you don't know which way that's going to go either. But when it starts to crack up, your yield goes to nothing. But if you start picking that up, you actually can undo the Mendelian work and find out what was in there if you're very, very careful. Who has time for that? And the answer is I only do it because I was interested in it, just to see it as an observer, not a scientist, not really even a farmer.
mm.
Uh, but we could get in a position where we need to be able to do that, is why I'm bringing it up.
Mm, mm. Now, another, this is a question I've never got to ask anyone before. And modern consumers, they're not only blind to like the importance of staple calories because they're so cheap and abundant, but they also often don't realize how perishable traditional staple crops are when they're prepared. Like we have these kind of chemically stabilized versions that you can put on a shelf for pretty much forever. Whereas the original, like you grind flour and it starts to go off within like 24 hours, 48 hours. And you've been running Anson Mills, like producing these freshly milled whole grain, locally grown staple crops. And I wonder what your thoughts are on like managing that issue of perishability and like reintroducing people to like real whole staple crops that they've probably never eaten in their life.
So, technology, aerobic culture comes from, let's take wheat, but it works with any staple. Aerobic wheat is what's going on in the field when you see it waving in the wind. It takes a lot to take the aerobic character out of a stable wheat plant, especially when it's shocked and aging in the field. That's not to kill the aerobics. That means it's breathing oxygen like a person
Mm,
when it's in those shocks. We've walked away from that. And that is a different food. And no one even thinks about it anymore. But how many people are shocking wheat and letting it stand and equivalent, it makes itself an equivalence. Every panicle, every head of wheat is the same ripeness. Whereas if you cut a field of wheat with a machine, even if it's industrial wheat, you get a variance in maturity. And once you take that wheat and separate it from its rachis, the little stem that attaches to this stem of the plant from the seed, the little teeny stem that goes to the hard stem of the plant. Once you take that rec high and break it, and the seed is independent, the clock's ticking. And if you have conditions that aren't conducive to keeping that wheat aerobic, it starts to go anaerobic immediately. Anaerobic wheat is money in the Western Hemisphere.
Mm,
We based all money on it, so there's nothing wrong with it, but it is a different food form. And what we did in order to get to anaerobic wheat was automatically oxidize it in the industrial system in order for it to be shelf stable and to make flours that were oxidized that were totally shelf stable. Nothing wrong with that at all, honestly. But we eliminated half the culture in our industrial revolution here, and that also happened in Europe about 50 years earlier. We had riots here. They're not even noted in history. It's not a big deal. If you study history in high school, nobody's going to bring up the wheat riots in Kansas when they actually said, we don't want aerobic wheat anymore. We don't want that tall straw stuff. We want the fast stuff that's shorter. We get better yield, blah, 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 blah. That all hit Mendelian-wise really, really quickly and devastated a lot of legacy farms that some of them never recovered. Then there were some that survived through all that because they just didn't listen to anybody. They said, okay, well, we'll just start milling our own flour. So they did. And that's meant for local community consumption because you go to the mill, get fresh flour, enough for the week, and it won't oxidize even if it's at room temperature in a dark place in your house.
mm,
That's the tradition. So outside of that, that's for community wheat, and that works. You go to the mill, get enough wheat for the week, go home. It's like going to the grocery store.
mm,
Big deal. So we replicate that here by doing cold milling because we want to keep everything aerobic. We don't want any oxygen in the system, so we flush the system. We run everything from whole grain straight through all the way to the final packed bag and out the door and shipped all in the same day. And because of the way we mill, the aerobics are protected. We can get it to a month in transit and it'll still be aerobic. It'll still be breathing oxygen as a finished flour as long as it gets in the freezer and nobody opens the bag. If you open the bag for a sec, all the flavor and aroma is out of there. So there's no reason to get it anyhow because you've got then dormant wheat. And
mm,
why bother? You can go to the store and get that. So that was everybody's culture. There are 14 mills per county on the east coast of the United States up until World War II. 14 mills.
mm, mm.
Now there's three per state, maybe.
Yeah,
Big
yeah.
ones, great big things. The silos go on forever. I see it every time I go through Richmond. I look and I go, holy crap, that's amazing. Because those mills are now old, even though
Mm,
their silos go on forever. Now they've got mills with 48-inch ID feed, and there's no humans in that system at all. And it's got a big tower, and one guy is required to be there by the federal government to push a button to turn it on and off, given the rates of electricity and what time of day it is. And it'll run any time of the day. The cars are there sitting, dropping, they're washed, they're dried, and they pick up the finished flour and go right back to the dock.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
the California system. It's awe-inspiring on technology side, but it's kind of crazy. The delivery things, there's four 48-inch diameter delivery pipes for wheat berries to go into that milling system, and there's 150 processes until it goes back into a rail car and back to the docks.
Mm.
It's nuts.
Extraordinary, but also
Yeah,
terrifyingly centralized and fragile.
exactly.
Everything pivots on just a few giant machines.
Well, Australia is a net exporter of wheat, last I checked. And even though my brother-in-law, Lewis, says it's still possible to get out there and get the real thing right at the wheat farm with a little teeny mill, getting fresh flour and taking it home and cooking with it, because that's what they do in his house. So we do that here. And we have farmers markets that use our stuff that we feed every week in the entire region. And we also take a nod to other local producers. We try not to step on anybody. We don't get in their way. And if it's something like one of the best sellers we've ever had is Jimmy Red Corn, we purposely didn't put it up on retail because we wanted everybody else to have it. That's probably a stupid marketing idea, but it actually worked for biosecurity for Jimmy Red Corn. We didn't want to lose it because it was so important to the local economy back in the day, and it was important to native people as well. And it has its own native names, and it
Well,
goes all the way down to Nikits.
kind of branching into the culture section of what I wanted to talk about. Are you seeing that the Anson Mills model is starting to replicate that there's other people creating small kind of, I guess you call them boutique mills in the current culture? Is that awareness and appreciation and the viability of that industry starting to pop up on the smaller, uh, decentralized scale around your part of the world?
It's been incredible how many small mills. And when I say small mills, I mean we got one mill at home. We may be milling a whole bunch of stuff, but it's not that much of each thing. And then we have a garage market every week.
Mm,
And it starts and a few people are doing it, and then other people hear about it, and more people are doing it, and then pretty soon you're maxed out in your house and you're moving into a real bakery. The other
yeah,
one is mobile kitchens, trucks, food trucks. The one mill in the food truck that's milling directly into the bag for you while you stand there, that actually started on the West Coast and then came rolling over here. And now that lots of those models, I just had a very good pastry chef who said, screw it, I don't want to be a pastry chef anymore about 5 years ago. And she said, I'm getting I'm getting a food truck and I'm going to get permission from Walmart to put my food truck in their parking lot and I'm just going to sell donuts to local people. Well, she couldn't just do donuts. She started that way and it was a massive success. Big lines every Saturday morning. She was only out there 2 days a week, but the lines were like a block long to get her donuts,
yeah,
right? And it was just a small food truck. So then she decided to move someplace else right near there. And and she decided, well, I'll just do breakfast sandwiches too. And that took off, and now there's a line 2 blocks long to get the breakfast sandwiches. And it just came out in the paper this week that she's moved into her bakery finally. That was 4 years she was
yeah,
doing that.
yeah,
And that's pretty much the model. So if you look at it that way, she's taking her mill into her new bakery, so she's milling for herself.
yeah,
And
yeah.
there are so many really cool people doing that. And it's the perfect model because there's no carbon footprint at that point because it's all I drive up, I get my stuff, I go home. Or
Yeah.
I have it delivered and there's a lot of people delivering it, and that's like consolidating the carbon footprint. And it's place-based, identity preserved, local culture. Everybody knows everybody, so you're not sitting there making stuff up. They can taste it
Mm,
and they
mm.
know when you're screwing up and you learn very quickly not to. And that is quite brutal. I've done it, so I know. But I've watched so many people do this, and I sort of wish I had done it that way. I
Well,
didn't.
I wanted to ask you about like when you started Anson Mills back in 1998. We you were kind of like among the first kind of going down this direction. Did you? I'm just really curious about the psychology of that process. Like, what kind of got you started doing it, and did you have any like oh shit moments when you were like partway committed, but it hadn't proven itself to pay off yet?
Well, it didn't pay off for 3 years, and I thought I was going out of business every week for 3 years. And so I wouldn't wish that on anybody because I sold everything I had to start, but I stupidly said, okay, I'm going to build a mill. I had no idea what I was talking about. I was just absolutely lucky. If I had do it again and tried to replicate what I did before, I wouldn't get past the first year
Yeah, yeah.
because I bought 3 mills. I sold everything I had. It was actually a really cool sale because I was a big horse person and all that. So I had all this horse gear and all that, and I had a beach house, and so I had the final sale unloading everything in the beach house and all my equine gear and everything else I had in order to get the mills and move in where I am right now today. I already knew where I wanted to move. I knew everything but what the hell a mill was. But I happened to make the mistake of getting the best, most enduring mill equipment, which never, ever gets old. You
Mm,
can always fix it,
yeah.
right? So everything we have, including our rice mill, there was no such thing as perpetual rice mills when I started. It just happened. I said, I don't like any of these small rice mills just because I didn't like the small rice mills. It wasn't because I knew what I was looking at. But I said, if I were a scientist, I would get a lab rice mill. So I just started looking for lab rice mills and I found one that we still have 26 years later almost, right?
It,
But I
is
didn't know what I was doing.
Is the experience a little bit like growing an annual crop that if you sow it too early, a frost might turn up and destroy it, and if you sow it too late, it might be too far into the dry season, that you kind of intuited your way to the right time in history to do what you did. If you'd been 5 years earlier or 5 years later, it might not have worked.
I wish I could say I did anything. Mostly, I had really good people that couldn't stand me screwing up. I can remember very people I admired because I was in the hotel business and I managed to do all the food concepts we did started on the farm.
Mm.
It's not like farm to table. We had table to farm,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
We made that very, very clear. We don't care a damn thing about what farm to table is. We want to go from the table. We want people at the table to understand where the farm is. Go see the farmer. Don't come to us.
Yeah.
Find out what that food is, and then let us interpret it for you. And if you don't like it, fine. If you do like it, that's great. And we'll all share. And you can invite us over and we'll learn from you too. We don't care. Every food system I did from LA to Seattle to New York to Maine to Florida to Miami to you name it down in the Caribbean and in Europe, every one I worked on was exactly the same thing because that's essentially how European restaurants work.
Mm, mm. Yeah,
Everything's based in the field.
I'm getting the feeling that that has been like the key to your successes is that you started with culture and then you found the agriculture that feeds into that. If you try and do it the other way around, um, I mean, a good example in permaculture communities, they all often start growing a plant that they kind of know is edible on the other side of the world, and they'll share it with each other saying, this thing's edible, but nobody's actually eating it. It's just this kind of weird totem to like the theory of an agricultural system. And it's a really difficult barrier to overcome. Like I struggle with this every day. I've got a pile of jack beans sitting on the desk with me right now. I've been growing them for years, and I've only just recently started exploring how to use them in the kitchen. And and it's not enough for just me to do it. I have to convince other people to eat this stuff and grow it for all of this to mean anything. And yeah, I think because you grew up in restaurants, and I think that's
I
given
did.
you a really vital perspective on building culture around things. Uh, that's just a comment. I don't know if you have anything
Well,
you want to add to that.
you, yes, I do. And you're right on the cusp of everything we do and have done. And I went 3 years before I even knew this, but um, because I didn't even know what a landrace crop was. The difference between Mendelian crops and landrace crops, the first massive difference up until probably the early 80s for real when it started impacting culture. Scientists knew this from the beginning and it wasn't important because they were going for yield. But it's in landrace crops, especially if you can get them disassociated from chemical culture, flavor and aroma equals nutrition.
Mm,
Flavor and aroma developed aerobically when you're actually working for aerobic culture, the early new crop plant that's a totally different food than the one that's anaerobic, which is what protected everything biblically and what has been worshipped and stored and used as marital, dowries. The most expensive dowry was the best preserved uh, anaerobic emmer. Those dowries were worth a fortune. That seed was worth a fortune because they knew it could last for centuries and still be viable. And we've got proof of that now because we pulled stuff out of Egyptian tombs and planted it and it grows. Go figure.
mm,
So in this case, I knew that in wine, aroma and flavor equals quality, right? We know that. The higher the quality, the more aroma, flavor, or vice versa, however you want to do. And unfortunately, worldwide, when I started, it wasn't true for the best wines in the world. They weren't that expensive compared to any other wine out there, to tell you the truth. So if you had a Lafite Rothschild or you name the best Burgundy that you can get your hands on, things like that, or a Sauterne that was phenomenal. And you looked at crap Sauterne and you looked at really phenomenal. It wasn't that much. Now it's thousands of bucks difference. But the bottom line back then was aroma and flavor equals quality because you could not have a quality wine without balance, aroma, flavor, and all the other things that go into sensory perception. We actually started the company based on that. And that's the only thing I knew because I
Mm.
was in the wine business and food business and I cared about aroma and flavor and texture too. Had to, and then pairings, et cetera, et cetera. So in doing the work on sensory, the only thing I had for a guide was, do I like this? I don't care whether I was getting 5 bushels an acre if it tasted good. It didn't make any difference to me. I wasn't looking for profit. I've never taken a dime out of the company. I've never been paid to do this. I'm doing this because I like the aroma flavor thing. And I'm also doing this because I like the biosecurity thing. And we invented this thing, which has been around for thousands and thousands of years because aroma and flavor equals nutrition equals biosecurity.
Mm.
And we've been putting that up as a hallmark. They're about to print T-shirts with it, pass them out all over the United States. I'm sure that that's going to make a big impact, and we should sell you one because I see you have a T-shirt
Oh.
on. Oh, we'll
Well,
send you one for free.
yeah, I read as well that you originally had some difficulty convincing farmers in your area to like join in the fun. And I'm curious about like what that overcoming that resistance was like and how far has that come along?
It's been amazing. The last we we were lucky. Again, that's it. I met a person named Trisway Stack, who I still work with every day. We are not uh, business partners officially. We ought to be, but we aren't. We're de facto business partners. We've been working for 20 plus years now on a handshake. And he does all the research work with our GM, Eufrain Ninico Ramos, um, for all of the stuff that we have to have an answer to. So he's got tons of land and he's a firefighter. He decided at midlife that he was not just going to be a farmer, he was going to be a farmer firefighter. I didn't know there was such a thing until I read Kurt Vonnegut, and then I remembered, oh yeah, there was a lot of farmers that were firefighters up in New England. His dad was from New England. He's born here, so he's a drop dead Southerner with a great accent. But anyhow, the bottom line is the idea of um, place-based terroir, getting flavor out of a field, all that never was important as long as we knew that we were going to get it. And even during the pandemic, we thought that the way to guarantee aroma, flavor, biodiversity, nutrition, and biosecurity, the way to do that was to invest in seed and then give it away as fast as we could give it away. And that's been the mission. I didn't discover that that was important until I met a researcher named Dr. Anna McClung, who was a rice researcher. And she told me that I could keep paying $75,000 a line 4 times a year for Puerto Rico and Costa Rica and U.S. growouts to accelerate all the land races I wanted to plant, or I could stop trying to monetize seed ever and we could work on land races together. And at that point, she would give me a de facto, you do it for free position, documenting part of her research. And that was in 2003, and everything changed after that. So since then, we've built our seed, the street value on our seeds easily 1.5 million. Usually it stays around there, and we do not monetize seed and haven't done it since we started. I wasn't monetizing it because I didn't even know what it was, or I didn't even know I was supposed to
Mm.
think about selling seed for other people to do it.
Is the narrowing of the industrial seed production business in the US giving you more leverage? Like more farmers are realizing that they're being chained to those very small number of like mega seed corporations and they're looking for alternatives and ways out?
We've got so many different incredibly high-powered initiatives with regard, like nobody really knows what Bill Gates is doing.
Mm.
And at this point, I believe he owns more farmland than anybody else in the United States. And I think everybody in the world knows who he is, Microsoft. And he's also one of the most generous philanthropists in the world. He's brilliant. I've worked with people that work with him. So they didn't seem to be monsters to me, and they were into public good. That's how I met them.
Mm,
because we were providing seed to underserved communities and they were doing the same thing. And I said, okay, well, you want to do that and I'll do this, or do you care or whatever? Because I don't want to step on what you're doing. And we'd have the dialogue and make sure everybody was comfortable wherever we were going, because that was in the Pacific Northwest and I was commuting. I don't live here, I live in the South, right? And so I got a lot of funny stares, but when everybody figured out I didn't come out there to take anything or to make money, I just wanted to do underserved communities. We started working with all the nations, and we just kept on going. And the food banks and stuff in Seattle were already being pretty well maintained, and we just augmented whatever it was wherever we thought it was important, and tried to stay out of the way because it's really a good place. So,
mm,
having said that, that overview that constantly gets hit by being world-class billionaires and all that stuff, I'm not sure. Um, I don't even know what they're doing. So we have that, and then we have the women's movement in the United States, and then we have more women farmers now than we've had since the early 1800s, the way it's been running.
mm,
And it's all small farms, and we've got that. Then we have people who are decelerating down from industrial back into what we call regen agriculture, which is really the sun cycle. It's been around and it has various names all over the world. It's the same system everywhere, which is polyculture versus perennial. It's not really dependent on perennial or non-perennial crops. It's growing a lot of crops together in that system. So whatever you want to call regen, our number one proponent for that was World Voice was Al, uh, who was our wonderful vice president for a while, and now he's just on his own as a standalone kind of person who does public community development outreach very quietly in some instances, noisily in others. But Al Gore's been really good, and we have a guy that owns the White House Plantation that's doing the same thing, and they've actually worked together. And then he works independently too. Will Harris, of White House Plantation, um, which is phenomenal what he does. And it's some of the largest cattle herds in the United States are down there. They're all biodynamically free range. Everything is the pasture, looks like heaven, et cetera, et cetera. So you have those full communities like that doing resonance on that level. They could have chosen to be industrial. In fact, Will Harris is a good example because he was. And he finally just looked at it and go, I can't do this anymore.
mm,
Most of the money I'm spending is on chemicals to come in here and screw everything up. Do I really need to do that? He just took a common sense approach. Now he's got the largest regenerative farm in the American Southeast.
mm, mm.
He's a phenomenal man. So those models I've followed from the beginning.
Well, I'm also curious if you're distributing these incredibly valuable seeds for free, how do you prioritize who gets them if there's ever like more demand than supply? Like, what criteria do you use to try and get the maximum benefit out of the material that you're creating and distributing?
We've got the upside down model, which is not original. But honestly, to this minute, no one's actually gone after it like we have. I was in the hospitality business, building hotels and restaurants, working all over the planet. Um, and I just got tired of getting on airplanes. But the way I did it was one, I knew the only thing that determined the success of a hotel or a restaurant really for the long term was a world-class chef who was in it for life,
Hmm.
for real. I knew chefs that didn't want to be media hogs, even though some of the chefs that are media hogs, as I'd call it now, earned it and deserve it. And some are just doing it for media, which doesn't make sense to me because it really doesn't make them feel any better or anybody else feel any better, but they're world famous for it anyhow. I picked the ones, I think one Mashama Bailey in Paris right now would be a good example of a person who deserves it, that's not even trying for it. She just wants to share, period.
Mm,
And she makes it known. She has all kinds of invisible agendas to support underserved communities nobody even knows about. That's the kind of chef that I knew, and I knew lots and lots of them all over the United States and Canada, Mexico, South America, and Central America. And I actually used that. They were our test kitchens. It wasn't just me because I was cooking all this stuff and I do care. So when I was doing test kitchens, we were doing this sensory analysis just like we were doing great wine.
mm,
And I actually brought in very well-respected wine sensory people to sit in on these sessions. They couldn't believe it. We were cupping, we were doing all kinds of stuff that they do in the liquor and beer industry. And we're looking for that flavor because that flavor is the only thing that catches on with chefs and me. I'm not really a chef, but we went after chefs. And we're still chef oriented. So 90+% of our sales is direct to chefs worldwide, and 8, 7, 6% is retail, depending on what time of year it is, because our stuff is hard to cook. It's fungible, and you can't take a recipe from Betty Crocker and apply it to our stuff. It doesn't work because
Well,
we're aerobic.
well, that makes me wonder about your experiences and your hopes for this kind of agriculture and food moving from what could be accused of being like an elite kind of way of eating. Is it being democratized and spread amongst the broader population over time? How do you see that
Well,
process unfolding?
well, here's the unfair part of our model, which really isn't unfair to add to what I just said. We did what everybody calls Robin Hood, which steal from the rich, give to the poor.
Mm,
Those are harsh words, and we aren't stealing. But chefs know what they're doing when they buy from us because they know we're turning. There is no profit in Anson Mills. We're a special class because we're not a registered not-for-profit, but we are what's called a not-for-profit for-profit. I didn't even know that existed until 2 years ago. And it
mm,
is an IRS tax class in this country. But we've been doing it for since 1998. Whatever's on the bottom line, we put into seed and then we give it away.
mm,
That's our model. And the other thing is we compensate our techs that work here like they're working in California because we work in California. So I don't like paying California wages in South Carolina, even though I could get the same exact talent here for a lot, well, probably half price. And I hate thinking about labor that way. So techs have a share of profit and this and that and the other thing. And we're in the process of doing a real EBO, employee buyout, which they're going to get the whole company.
mm.
Um, and since I don't take anything for myself, it's going to be a pretty good transaction for everybody that's here. This is a model that goes on all the time. That's nothing new there. But the other side of the model is chefs know what they're doing. They can come anytime and go into our fields. We'll spend any amount of time with them. We'll cook with them. We'll provide stuff they've never seen before. We'll do anything custom they ask. In fact, the major portion of our chef sales is custom. It's not even stuff that we list. They ask for stuff, we just get it for them.
Mm.
If we have to even go as far as Indonesia to work with growers there, then we give the seed back to them, get them to grow it, and then they connect direct to the chefs. We don't.
Oh, now where did I want to take this? Oh, no, just a brief point. My brain's
Yeah,
going in 10 different directions. I'm loving
yeah,
the
I got you.
conversation so much. I just had a little historic thought that when machine polished white rice was first introduced, it was an elite food because it cost more, it was a complex technology, and it was the peasants that had to eat like the hand pounded brown rice, that horrible, stuff that only poor people can have. And there's this weird kind of issue of like fashion and status that goes around food. And it's this reversal. Like when industrialization first rolled out, it was the high tech food that was like, the fancy stuff that, only certain people could access. And now we've been eating it for so long and realizing its deficiencies that it's not exciting anymore. It's kind of depressing that we only have like this Wonder Bread and, breakfast cereal to feed on. And yeah, I think it's going to take time for that process to percolate through to the broader culture that and I think the one really amazing stuff with whole landrace staple crops is that they speak for themselves. If you have an opportunity to try one of these dishes, you suddenly realize how empty the food that you've been raised on your entire life is. It's like cows that have, been raised in a barn on grain being put out into a good pasture for the first time, and to like have that connection to their ancestry, to reconnect.
Just the flavor of the milk is expression enough, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think the best interpretation of all this um, is in the eyes of everyone that is not doing it.
Mm.
and whether or not there's a spark of recognition that maybe they could. And I don't know what the ratio is there, one in 10,000, one in 100,000. I don't know. But we have seen, we get effusive letters from people. Frankly, I'm old now, so I don't even remember who they are. But it's like, I had some of your stuff. I kept having it. I have it. And then one of my friends said that they could get me some seed. And I got some seed and I put it in my garden and I grew it and I tasted the kernels and they were really, really good. Now I'm growing 30 acres, and you're going, holy
Yeah,
moly,
yeah, yeah.
and you're doing, okay, that's community feed, right? We
Well,
used to have a radius
yeah.
for community feed.
Mm,
We didn't have a radius for biosecurity. That
mm,
was what was wrong because the radius for biosecurity was the entire east coast of the United States until the 1980s.
yeah.
And we still don't know where that radius is, honestly, because Helene proved that our radius for biosecurity is definitely three state. And we used to say, oh, yeah, it's a community within 35 miles. I'm not buying any food outside of that.
Mm.
But that really makes no sense when you think about biosecurity and catastrophic events.
I'm curious if you have seen much local culture coalescing around local food, and I would even throw like a return to live music into the equation. That like digital recorded music is now so pervasive that its value has basically fallen to zero. It's just nobody really cares about it anymore. But I'm seeing sparks around the world of people returning to live music, and I'm wondering if there's parallels there with returning to local landrace food.
We have, and again, these identities I saw evolve in California before here because I was raised up there and I have we grow out there, we do research out there, and I have lots of friends on the West Coast. So I saw this developing in the early 90s, where the outdoor experience, quote unquote, with the long table and the candelabra and all that, started switching from this super upscale, Elizabethan almost celebratory kind of very, very upscale experiences started getting more in line with the hippie movement in a way. And folk music is acoustic instruments versus electric, and local artists becoming famous locally.
Mm,
That actually wasn't going on in the 80s. So if you were a local artist, you could become famous nationally, but being famous locally was really hard. In Appalachia, you could do it because I watched that happen, but I didn't see that happening in LA or San Francisco back then. You had to do what everybody else was doing, get a recording contract and all that. But I saw it going back to people who were strictly performing and didn't even want to record, even though they could. That they wanted to go and do a full scale event that had the music lined up with the food and all that. And I remember the first one I went to was eight chefs from LA, about 200 people. There wasn't any much organization, a place to sit down and eat. There's a place to get the food. They were cooking the food in sequence. They weren't getting it all out at the same time. There wasn't any service. You just walked up and got your food.
mm,
And at the same time, there were phenomenal musicians who were all local. This was out in Tehachapi. And I'm going, where's Tehachapi? I didn't even know. Right. And I grew up in California, and somebody said, oh, it's over the hills. Go that way, go straight east, and you'll end up in Tehachapi eventually. And it is absolutely gorgeous out there. And I didn't know it. So
interesting.
that phenomena started. That's the first time I saw that. It was 2002.
Yeah,
And I heard about it through a friend of mine, Sonoko Sakai, who I still work with after all these years. And she had a home and a branch out there, and she told me that they were doing that, and it was with a woman who was a very, very her it was related to her. Well, I think a distant cousin or something was a very well-established Brooklyn artist whose mom was getting ill, and it was a Japanese family that had moved here and interned during the Second World War, went all through it, and founded their own rice mill, and were very successful. And she went back to take care of her mother. So I met that woman there doing a rice mill, and she was doing her art, and they were doing music, and it was a hell of a community. And still, it's going on,
yeah,
and
yeah.
it's all centered around the crops they grow there, Alex Weiser, I think, was a big influence on that, and he actually founded and runs the Santa Monica Farmers Market still to this day with Sherry Altman. But they founded that Tehachapi thing themselves,
Mm,
and it was just locals. That's it. It was
interesting.
really interesting.
Interesting. I I have maybe an odd question, but I'm nearly 50 and I'm trying to domesticate a new tree crop here, like utter lunacy. But has your lifetime given you a perspective on what somebody can achieve with one lifetime? Like, how do you look back on all of that, and what advice would you give to people who are partway through that journey?
That if you're doing it yourself, you're not doing it. If you're doing it with other people and they come first, you start it.
Yeah,
If you're doing it with other people and they come first and they're guaranteed success because you won't look away because you know what you're doing and you know how to help them do it. If you don't look away, they have a chance to define success. You never get to define it yourself. It's only reflected back in the people that you work with.
yeah,
And if you
yeah,
think you're going to get something out of that besides their success, your expectations need to be adjusted
yeah.
because it's about them. It's not never about you.
Interesting.
And I've followed that since I quit the hotel business. In a hotel, it's so regimented, you don't get to think so much like that. But out here, it's the person who put their hand on it the last is the most important.
I guess that ties into your, you mentioned the employee buyout that you're planning with
Yeah,
Anson Mills.
right.
That taps perfectly into that spirit.
Yeah. Everybody, we've had people here. I just found out today, I thought I knew that a guy I thought that was the second hire here is actually a first hire, and he's been here since 2004. And I thought he didn't come till 2007. And we were talking, he was laughing his butt off. He's a phenomenal musician. We have lots of, by the way, the profile, musician or chef, makes great meal techs,
Yeah.
right?
They've got that
The
sensitivity. They can pay attention to what's happening right in front of them.
Yeah, it's polymorphic thinking.
Yeah,
They're multiphasic, right? Especially musicians. And what we do, you have to be able to do it. You have to be able to work three different things at once, and you can't let anything oxidize. So
yeah,
everybody here can think on that level, and they know how to switch back and forth so that no one gets hung.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
kind of fun to watch, actually.
Interesting. I
Yeah.
also, maybe it's a bit greedy, but I wondered if you had any advice for me, because I'm living in a part of the world with a climate somewhere between northern Florida and the humid part of East Texas, and it oscillates between those at random. And we're a mostly European extracted culture, but we've moved to that very subtropical climate, and we've got almost no pre-industrial agricultural tradition to tap into, and there's hints of like distant Aboriginal connections to the land, but they're, very different to our culture, like a much bigger cultural gap than between, I think, Anglo-American culture and indigenous agricultural peoples. And I'm trying to put together some kind of foundation that people could use to feed themselves in the future if they, couldn't go to the supermarket anymore. And I'm in nearly 50, so I've got maybe another 20 years of good activity ahead of me. So I'm curious what advice you would give to somebody in my position who's trying to uh, do what might seem kind of challenging. I don't know.
Well, I'm only qualified, unfortunately, and probably boringly, to comment in a realm that I have some security. I wouldn't say success, but security in. Like, I don't worry that we're going to get killed in a catastrophic event or I'm going to get eaten by a bear, although I've been challenged by bears and alligators and everything else, as you can imagine, because we grow rice.
Hmm.
But and I've been chased by a moose in New England. That was fun.
Mm.
Uh, but the not necessarily advice, but a way of thinking that if you and I have a very, very long time friend who's actually in your part of the world. I believe even right now, I'm not sure. Her name's Pam Young, and she just can't stop moving. So she's been everywhere in the world. Her main place of focus now is underserved and served communities in Bali. But she was raised in upstate New York, and she became the number one pastry chef in New York with nobody even close to her, and everybody thought that she was going to get her own, restaurant and have the best pastries on the planet because she was doing so well. And she just woke up one morning and said, I want to make pizza. Right. So my advice, because we were fast friends. I was friends with her, also super chef boyfriend at the time, before she became a wandering trove of encyclopedic knowledge about biosecurity, landrace crops, especially wheat to make pizza dough, et cetera, et cetera. She just focused on pizza everywhere in the world. So she was looking at flatbread culture, which is universal.
Mm.
And in doing that, she started looking hard at pizza as genetics and then the ethereal part of pizza, which comes in the flavor aroma profile and how you develop it and what's involved in the levain, et cetera, et cetera. She started thinking on this massive scale about the micro aspects and almost in a way spiritual. And I never saw her as a spiritual person, to tell you the truth. She was funny as a crutch and really, really smart. Um, but I think she's moved into that realm. And I know Sarah Owens is the same way, and she's a world-class baker too. This kind of transition happens in bakers who are maturing in the career. They start understanding the subliminal parts of the realities of growing wheat, and then how the wheat gets to the mill, and how the mill does the wheat, and how the wheat becomes friends with the most diverse population on the planet, wild yeast and or cultured yeast that you do yourself that's still wild, but you're handling it yourself and manipulating it somewhat. So they get involved with that, and then pretty soon they start looking through the bread and through the yeast and looking at culture that hasn't existed for thousands of years. And I've seen this now in two women. I haven't seen it in a guy, but I've seen both of those women do that, and it's extraordinary. So my advice to you would be, can you see through the plant? Do you
Yeah,
see the future through the plant?
yeah,
And if you have that, then you already have your answer
yeah,
because
yeah.
you can do anything.
Well, it's interesting you talk about that because there's this, I don't know, it seems to be cropping up all around the world, this kind of calling, kind of mystical calling it's popping up in people. And it almost makes me wonder if it's soon going to be time for something like a monastic movement around local landrace agriculture, of reclaiming those traditions that we kind of took for granted for the last few hundred years. Because it's not an easy process, and it's not something that you can do solo. It needs some kind of coordination.
Well, we have a corollary to this that repeats itself about once every half millennia. And on our particular situation, not more than 70 miles from here, there is an abbey, and it's a Franciscan Jesuit abbey, and it's been there since the early 1600s, maybe even before then, but it was settled way early, and it's still there, and they're still doing almost all the same things they were doing back then, up to and including they have very little electricity, but that whole campus, which goes on forever and has stunning architecture, amazing fields of production, and they do bread, wheat, and this and that and the other thing. Their husbandry is 1% from perfect, and you see this replicated all the way up the East Coast in the Jesuit culture. And I'm just picking one. I could do the same thing with rabbinical and definitely with Muslim culture,
Mm,
which stays mostly under the radar. But our largest Muslim population at 1800 was on Sapelo Island, which is off the coast of Georgia, which
mm.
is deep south. And they had to defend themselves because Muslims weren't so popular. But they also had some of the best beef, interesting. They had definitely the best wheat in Georgia. Their growing ideas were strictly shepherded by Franciscan Jesuits. coming straight out of Rome and Rome culture in the Mediterranean.
Mm,
And so they were responding to the Jesuits that were working with them. They weren't adversarial. That's kind of interesting because can't think anything more adversarial than Muslims. And the ashrams and things like that in Savannah, in the First Reformed Hebrew congregation, which is First Reformed Church in or synagogue in Savannah, they still walk the fields in kosher wheat the old way. It's really
mm,
cool to watch.
mm.
And they used to have Muslims doing that with them because they didn't have any rabbis, so they were lay koshering. And there was Presbyterians and Methodists, Catholics, Jews, and Muslim all koshering, quote unquote, the same fields
Yeah, yeah.
before before 1850. And somehow we got into the war between the states and blew all that up. The cultures are still there. The First Reformed Temple is still operating. The synagogue, the ashram, everything is there. And if you go to Sapelo Island, most people on the island are Muslim. It's really interesting. And
Interesting.
their quality was bar none. And I don't think that's ever going to go away, by the way.
Well, before we wrap up, do you have any thoughts about incorporating, including children in traditional agriculture? Because that seems to be like there's a window of plasticity in humans as well at the start of their life. And have you seen any interesting approaches to getting young people involved in this? Because often, it's not until later in life you kind of have this awakening to it. And I just keep thinking people, if they could start doing it younger, they could achieve so much more in a lifetime.
Okay, so um, that really hits home. So we have to bring up my friends, Joe Nathan and Jessica Harris. Joe Nathan's a world-renowned scholar and has been a Hebrew scholar of note since she was a child. She's a resident of Washington, D.C., and has all kinds of public and underserved community initiatives, which nobody even knows she does. And then in the summer, they all come to the vineyard. Jessica Harris has a world mission, and she works all over the world. She was an English professor at Queens College, professor emeritus for that matter, and has 30 some books out there or something. And her publication stream is a mile long. Her main, she took a PhD in Senegalese French theater in Senegal with under Sorbonne. So she then taught at the Sorbonne and Queens College concurrently, then moved back to the US. But her background belies all that because her parents, although they were super smart and all that, they weren't college professors. Uh, and they were not wealthy, but they were in tune with culture enough to be able to go to Martha's Vineyards in summer in a cabin in Oak Bluffs on Martha's Vineyard, which is off the coast of what people would call Boston and surrounds, which is in the northeast of the United States on the coast. And it's off the coast about 20 miles or so, and it's beautiful there. And she grew up there on the beach. And they had a beach for, it was segregated, so they had a beach for Africans and those of African descent called the Inkwell. Nice name. It's still called that. I guess the African community took it over and they said, we're not changing the name. It's still the Inkwell to us, even though the city and the county and all that changed it because of obvious reasons. But she got thrown off the Inkwell for being African American when she was a little kid, and it's stayed with her entire life. And she's gone back to elementary schools without telling anybody really. She just shows up, establishes who she is, and then she goes in and does the spark of a very advanced, what we would have called advanced literature, but she puts the spark in anywhere from 7 year olds. She says 7 to 12 is where she wants to be because that's when everything's still pliable.
Hmm.
And I've actually worked with her on that. I did a whole program with her for 2 seasons once, and it was the toughest work I'd ever done because the questions are tough. You got people that are 8 years old asking you stuff that you've never even heard of before. I don't
Yeah.
know how the hell they got there. And I took that program with her. She went and took that to the Smithsonian, and she took the same program to the Crops Institute and three more institutions. And she actually consulted hard on all that stuff and uh, did Brownsville and then went all the way over to do the biggest forestry park in the United States that's um, the most tree diversity in New York State. And she was on the board there, still is. And she did a 2-year program that we did for kids where we did interpretive growing, but we made sure that it could be turned into food. And
Yeah.
it's very difficult to do in public schools because they have regulations against it. But Martha's Vineyard particularly has a very aggressive program due to a group of locals who really cared about early education and making sure farming was understood and food was understood. That actually folded out into all over New England. And when it hit New York City, we got little wheat plots growing in Brooklyn area and Brownsville area schools, and then we bought them bicycles that you sit on and it grinds the wheat berries after you harvest them, and they can
Yeah.
make little biscuits with it.
Yeah.
That program she drove all the way to where there's plaques on the wall with her name on it in memoriam,
Mm.
and she's still doing it. She's older than I am, and she's traveling internationally doing outreach. She does it for nothing.
And
Uh,
and and
so
the power
that's
of
a model.
that, like a lot of people in middle age is the first time they like tuck into a bowl of like whole rice and realize the difference. To do that
Yeah,
20, 30 years earlier in life, to be given that perspective on what the industrial
exactly.
food system is doing to you is priceless.
Well, the vineyard has exhibition growth program that's super well funded and is for all island kids. And they even come in from the mainland and tour the gardens because the gardens are all edible. And
Mm,
they have the taco garden that has corn in it, and they make tacos in the cafeteria from the corn that they harvest themselves and mill themselves in the cafeteria, and then go ahead and make nixtamal with it.
mm,
It's an amazing program.
yeah.
And Jessica was a big supporter of that. And Joan Nathan, to give her credit as well, has done that same work worldwide with Hebrew culture and then just general food culture because she's a genius on that level too. Both of them
Mm.
are just amazing.
I'm
So I
I'm
learned
gonna
a
have
lot from both of them.
I'm gonna have to take inspiration with that and cook up something similar, at least help get it off the ground here. And again, it's not something that one person can do on their own. I think I have to inspire the right people to collaborate and get on that kind of
I'll
path.
give you hope.
Yeah.
On the vineyard, this was the idea of one woman,
Mm.
Carol Kenny,
Yeah.
who now lives in New York. We're still friends. And it was one woman that decided this program should work. And
It's that one off
she
type that you
started
spot in the
herself.
field. It's a random mutation or outcross that if you find the right one, it can be the start of some whole new tradition.
Yep.
Mm.
She recruited a woman named Noli Taylor, who's now in charge of that whole program for the island. It's massively successful. And I didn't know Carol Kenny was doing all this. And she's a fairly private individual, but not completely because her husband was on the board of Harvard. So everybody knew they read about him all the time because he made a lot of radical and very smart decisions for the school. But the
Mm.
the bottom line, just a phenomenal mind and a really, really good person. So you notice I'm talking about women all the time, and I
Yeah,
shouldn't leave out my wife,
yeah,
who's
yeah,
also
yeah. I need to
been
find
pivotal in my
I
life.
need to find some women. Now I have a final fun question that I love asking everyone. If you could wave a magic wand and create a new life form to share with the world, what would you wish into existence? Like, I mean, imagine if you had like 5 lifetimes to breed and develop something, completely off the wall, or maybe something familiar that you just think it needs to be tweaked in a way that nobody's quite pulled off yet.
I thought a little bit about this because I don't usually think that way, but it's a challenging question. My idea was to turn a porpoise into an international, then interstellar being.
Ah, yes.
So if you have everything a porpoise can do, and I mean everything, because
Mm.
we're talking they can go down to 400 feet, et cetera, et cetera. They can go more than that, actually. Uh, and to some respects, some whales would be an example of that too. they're anomalous creatures because they're aquatic and can move around on land. Been chased down the beach by a porpoise in the Virgin Islands, so I know that they can get around. I don't even know why that porpoise was chasing me, just for fun, I'm sure. But I did get chased down the beach by a porpoise who was in the sand. It wasn't in the water,
Yeah, yeah.
right? And then jumped right back in the water and swam away, probably laughing. So I think the interstellar porpoise evolving over years as I discover what the tolerances would be for that kind of being would be the most fun.
Interesting. And
Yes.
I'll have to send you a copy of my book, Taming the Apocalypse. I did a survey of the entire tree of life for domestication potential because I look back at history like the horse domestication before that happened would have seemed so unlikely. These like vicious, flighty, like nervous, dangerous creatures being transformed into a partner of humanity and all of the impact that they have. Why can't we do that again? And porpoises are one of the creatures that were on my list as like to change our relationship with the ocean in a way that horses changed our relationship with the land.
Well, I agree with you 100%. And one of the perspectives on that, having been a horse person who wasn't that good at riding, but loved horses on the ground or on their back, either one, uh, from the time I was small, my attitude was, how long is it going to take this horse to train me?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's all a
Okay,
partnership. It's all symbiosis.
you got
Yeah.
it.
Brilliant. Well,
Excellent.
um, Glenn, thank you so much for what has been an amazing conversation. I hope I didn't keep you too long, but I loved every minute of
Yeah.
it.
Well, I wish you a speedy and expedient edit, and I can't thank you enough for the time. It's been fun, really. And
And
so thank you, thank you.
where can people learn more about what you do? What links should I put in the show notes for them to follow if they want to learn more?
It's easy. Just go to ansonmills.com and read whatever's there. I think it's up to 1,700 pages, and it's coming up, where is it? 2007. So 2 more years will be 20 years old. And
Hmm.
we haven't changed it a whit since 2014, really. It's a Luddite in the middle of AI.
Yeah, yeah.
It's so don't expect to see modern stuff in there because all the recipes are quite ancient. We have a little bit of interpretation, but most of those are been on the planet for thousands of years, the recipes, and they go on forever.
Excellent, excellent. I'm going to have to dig into it further as well. So yeah,
Yeah,
with
it's four
that,
cookbooks.
yes. Oh, brilliant.
Four cookbooks that my agent's been beating me up for about 10 years, telling me, why didn't you publish that? I said, we did. We put it online. He said, that's not a book. I said, well, it doesn't need to be a book, does it? It's online.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
He
No,
hates me now. He's a really good guy.
I love the spirit that you do everything in, and I hope to be inspired by it and achieve at least a little bit of what you've managed to do there in my very different local circumstances.
Well, same back to you, Shane. It's
Mm,
amazing.
mm.
Okay.
Okay, thank you
Keep
very
it up.
much.
Thank you, sir.
If you'd like to support the show and everything I do, you can sign up for a free subscription to Substack to read the articles every week when they first come out. And if you want to support further, you can get a paid subscription which will unlock the archive of past posts and the audiobook of Taming the Apocalypse. Next week, I'll be talking to my good friend Steve about many different crops that he's working on, but particularly his work breeding ancient teosinte with modern maize.